Let us know the Bible, Old Testament, with Father Claudio Doglio. Ezekiel and Daniel. While Jeremiah was preaching in Jerusalem, in the group of people deported to Babylon, there was another prophet called Ezekiel. Ezekiel was a temple priest from Jerusalem and was deported to Babylon in the first deportation of 597 and found himself living the rest of his life by the rivers of Babylon in a condition of exile. The group from the aristocratic court of Jerusalem had been deported by Nebuchadnezzar and sent to live in a suburban area of the great city of Babylon. And when Ezekiel turned 30, he should have been the time when he began his priestly ministry in the Temple of Jerusalem, which, however, was thousands of miles away, and the young Ezekiel was desperately distant and lost. While he was on the Kebar channel, one of the many channels of Babylon, in an attitude of depression, of demoralization certainly, the young Ezekiel had a vision. He saw in the storm coming from the north the very chariot of God. He saw the Merkabah, the chariot of divine glory. And with a baroque and redundant language, he describes it at the beginning of his book. Pulled by strange figures in the shape of man, calves, lions, eagles with winged wheels, full of eyes, the chariot of glory represented the Lord in person. The prophet's amazement is, since the Lord lives in Jerusalem, lives in the temple of Jerusalem, how can an exile in Babylonian channel see the Lord of glory who is in the temple of Jerusalem? This experience marked his existence. The young Ezekiel discovered that the Lord was also outside of Jerusalem. It seems such a simple and obvious thing for us, but it was not so obvious for the ancients, especially for an Israelite priest. The conviction of God's presence in the Temple of Jerusalem was very strong, and instead discovered that the Lord lived where his people lived. And there, in that small remnant of exiles, so far from Mount Zion in Jerusalem, the Lord was present. And Ezekiel became his prophet, his representative, and spokesman for God in exile. Jeremiah, God's prophet in Jerusalem. Ezekiel, God's prophet in Babylon. In the last 10 years of the history of the kingdom of Judah, thousands of miles away, without any contact between them, Jeremiah and Ezekiel, they say the same thing. Jerusalem will be destroyed. Put your heart at peace. Jerusalem must be destroyed because the people, and especially the ruling class, has reached the limit of tolerance for violating the covenant. Ezekiel is a visionary prophet who tells of many visions, even has the possibility of seeing what is happening in Jerusalem while in Babylon, and to see the temple from within and see it corrupt, full of idolatrous acts. Ezekiel is, like Jeremiah, a prophet of the covenant who announces the need to listen the commandments of the Lord and to put them into practice. When the situation reaches its climax without knowing what is happening in Jerusalem, a misfortune happens in Ezekiel's life when his wife dies suddenly. The prophet is widowed, and the trauma of this family pain makes him become mute. He loses his voice, becomes an exemplary situation, serves as a meaningful message. The prophet is silent and mute. The prophet becomes a type of God. That is, he incarnates in his concrete existence a situation that reminds them of God's situation. At that moment, in fact, in Jerusalem, there was also a situation that the Jerusalem was falling. Jerusalem, the bride of the Lord, metaphorically also, God remains a widower, like Ezekiel. He loses the light of his eyes, the jewel of Jerusalem, his beloved wife. A few months later, when the tragic news of the end of the city and the definitive collapse of everything comes from Jerusalem, Ezekiel has another vision, but it is the opposite vision. The surprise of the news gave him back his voice. The mute spoke again, and from that moment on, he began the second phase of his preaching, opposite of the first one. When Jerusalem resisted and everyone dreamed of success, Ezekiel had said that Jerusalem would be destroyed. Jerusalem must be destroyed. When Jerusalem was destroyed and everyone was demoralized and despondent, Ezekiel begins to say that Jerusalem will be rebuilt. Take courage, have hope. The Lord does not abandon his people, and he will rebuild Jerusalem. The second part of the book of Ezekiel after the oracles of rebuke and punishment, includes a long series of oracles of reconstruction and promises. And it is this second part of the prophet Ezekiel which we are particularly interested in as an announcement of new perspectives. So in chapter 34, Ezekiel composes a long poem against the shepherds. That is, he speaks of the leaders, of the authorities of Jerusalem, who have been the ruin of the people. The Lord enters into controversy against the shepherds who have scattered the sheep. They have exploited them, not cared for them, and the flock has been dispersed through the mountains. Through the prophet, the Lord announces, I myself will seek out my scattered sheep. I will be the shepherd of my people, Israel. I will restore the flock and save all the stragglers. It is an important oracle that underlines the role of the shepherd who God himself plays. When Jesus presents himself as a good shepherd, when he says he came to find the lost sheep, it makes an reference especially to this text of Ezekiel. And in presenting himself as a shepherd, he claims to be God himself in person who came to find his people and rebuild the lost herd. Thus, in chapter 36, Ezekiel announces the new covenant with the same motives as Jeremiah. The prophet of the exile also foresees a new intervention of God for a new covenant. Jeremiah had announced that the new covenant will be written on the heart. And Ezekiel says even more. A new heart will be given to them. These are beautiful words that Ezekiel relates in the name of God because he's a prophet and is the spokesman of God. I will sprinkle clean water over you to make you clean from all your impurities and from all your idols. I will cleanse you. I will take you away from among the nations, gather you from all the lands, and bring you back to your own soils. Ezekiel 36, 24 and 25. He will no longer gather them from all the nations in which they have been dispersed. Not only will take them back to their land, which happened a few years later, but I will cleanse from all your impurities. Not a superficial and external purification, but deep and interior renewal. I will give you a new heart and a new spirit I will put within you. I will remove the heart of stone from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. Ezekiel 36, 26. The heart of stone is the hard head. It is stubbornness. It is the arrogance of the person who has a hard head, who has a marble head, who does not understand, does not welcome, does not appreciate, or does not listen. The Lord promises to change people's hearts, to change people's spirit, that is, the people's mentality. Salvation is not something external and alien, but is the intervention in the depths of that transformation of man. I will give you a new heart and a new spirit I will put within you. I will remove the heart of stone from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. I will put my spirit within you so that you walk in my statutes, observe my ordinances, and keep them. You will live in the land I gave to your ancestors. You will be my people, and I will be your God. Ezekiel 36, 27, 28. This is the formula of the covenant, of the loving relationship between God and his people. It is the announcement of the new and eternal covenant. It is the Spirit that from within makes the people capable of living what the Lord has announced. It is not an external law, but an internal transformation of the heart. This is precisely what Jesus does in the new covenant. Not changing the laws, but changing the heart, making the people capable of living according to what pleases the Lord. In the last chapters, the prophet Ezekiel dreams of a new Jerusalem, describes the new temple, and with many symbolic images announces this great novelty that the reconstruction will characterize the people. Ezekiel did not return to Jerusalem. He died in exile and only dreams of this novelty. But his disciples took up his teaching, elaborated the book of his tradition, and passed it on to the new generations. When they returned to Jerusalem, new opportunities for conservation of the ancient texts were possible. And so, in the 5th and 4th centuries, in Jerusalem after the exile, the scribes gathered the ancient traditions, and the book of Isaiah was compiled, then the book of Jeremiah, and the book of Ezekiel, and the various prophetic traditions developed in previous centuries. These books formed a homogeneous collection in this late period where biblical literature was born. Only much later, in the 2nd century, during the Maccabean revolt, was the book of Daniel written. Daniel is considered the 4th great prophet, but in reality, it is not a prophetic book like the others. He's not a historical figure like Isaiah, Jeremiah, or Ezekiel, but Daniel is a literary character. He is the symbolic figure of a wise man, and when in Jerusalem around the year 165, the observant Jews were persecuted by the Greek, someone picked up the ancient traditions told anecdotes, wrote down the apocalyptic visions by attributing them to a fictitious character, Daniel, who had lived in Babylon during the deportation. But the Daniel mentioned was not present with Ezekiel, who was in Babylon. So it is important to distinguish between Ezekiel, a historical man in flesh and blood, who has lived, thought, written during the exile in Babylon, and Daniel, who is a literary character. Around the year 165, an inspired author created this book of apocalyptic teaching to encourage the faithful to resist and not give in to the impositions of a Hellenistic culture. One of the fundamental passages of the book of Daniel is the vision of the Son of Man. The author imagines himself dreaming of four beasts, one uglier than the other, coming out from the sea. Four beasts that represent four empires. They are those who had dominated Israel until then, starting with the Babylonians, the Medes, the Persians, and finally the Greek. Since the Greeks are the ones at that time, they are considered the worst of them all. Four beasts that represent the four world empires that at that moment another character appears in front of the beast, one similar to the Son of Man, who comes from among the clouds of heaven, is presented to the old man of the past, the eternal Father, we would say, sitting on the throne, and the old man gave to the Son of Man the power, the honor, the glory, and the kingdom, so that it becomes a universal kingdom. It is the expectation of a Son of Man, which does not simply mean man, but means a divine being, a heavenly character who comes in the clouds of heaven, called the Son of Man, as opposed to the beasts. It is power with a human face. It is the human aspect of power to which God gives authority. Jesus often and willingly attributed to himself the title of the Son of Man, taking this title from the book of Daniel to describe himself as a divine being, a heavenly person, one who comes from the world of God, and God has eternal power. Jesus realizes in himself this glorious figure of the Son of Man, and at the same time, the figure of the suffering servant of Jeremiah. He is the Emmanuel announced by Isaiah, the one who creates the new heart and purifies the people from their sins and gives the Spirit. As Ezekiel said, we understand that in Christ, the ancient rich and prophetic tradition has come a reality.